There are people who find their deepest truths in silence. You might be one of them. Outside the city hums, cars pass by, lights flicker in distant windows, the constant low-frequency noise of a world that never seems to stop moving, never seems to stop talking. But inside your room, there is only quiet. No music, no television, no conversation, just the steady, grounding rhythm of your own breathing. For many, this scenario evokes a sense of dread. They would call this loneliness. They would see it as emptiness, a void waiting to be filled with distraction. But for you, it feels like peace. It feels like relief. It feels, fundamentally, like coming home to yourself. Have you ever felt deeply misunderstood because you genuinely enjoy being alone? I have. For a very long time, I carried a quiet shame about it. I thought there was something wrong with me. I worried that my comfort in silence, my preference for a quiet evening over a crowded room, meant I was disconnected, cold, different, or perhaps fundamentally broken. They are the silent observers in the crowd, the ones who listen more intently than they speak, the ones who need to retreat after a day full of interaction, not because they dislike people, but because they need to process the world at their own pace. Society often looks at this quiet demeanor and jumps to conclusions. They think they are arrogant, boring, socially anxious, or weak. They mistake stillness for emptiness. But they don't know that behind that silence is an incredibly complex, rich, and vibrant inner world. A world not defined by the absence of others, but by the presence of the self. The more time spent alone, the more a profound truth solidifies. Solitude isn't emptiness, it's awareness. There is a quiet group of people who find strength in stillness. They don't fear silence, they understand it, they crave it, and psychology shows they're not lonely at all. In fact, they are often some of the most emotionally intelligent, self-aware, and deeply grounded people you'll ever meet. What is truly happening inside the mind of a person who loves solitude? And why does a world addicted to noise find this preference so suspicious, even threatening? When we talk about people who genuinely enjoy being alone, the first manifestation we observe is their intentional choice of silence over noise. This is crucial to understand, because we often fall into the trap of mistaking their quiet for loneliness, assuming that choosing silence means rejecting connection. But solitude, in its true psychological sense, is not an absence of something. It is the presence of awareness. To like being alone doesn't mean turning away from the world. It means feeling fundamentally at home within yourself. You are not waiting for someone else to arrive to feel complete. Psychologists have a specific term for this healthy state. They call it autonomous solitude. This is time spent alone by choice, intentionally, not out of isolation, social anxiety, or rejection. A landmark 2019 study in the Journal of Positive Psychology highlighted this distinction clearly. It found that people who intentionally seek solitude report significantly higher levels of emotional stability, creativity, and self-understanding. They aren't avoiding others out of fear. They are recharging through deep, introspective reflection. This is not antisocial behavior. It is pro-self behavior. Dr. Kenneth Rubin, a prominent developmental psychologist, described this state as constructive alone. It's a state where being by yourself becomes a source of growth, insight, and integration, rather than a source of emptiness or anxiety. The critical difference between healing solitude and painful loneliness lies entirely in intention and perception. Loneliness screams, "No one is here for me." It is a passive state of lack. It is involuntary. Solitude whispers, "I am here for myself." It is an active state of presence. It is a choice. The second key manifestation is a high capacity for people who thrive in solitude have cultivated the ability to manage their own emotional states, soothe their own anxieties, and find balance without needing constant external validation or distraction. They don't need someone else to tell them they are okay. They can generate that feeling internally. This preference is not just emotional, it's deeply biological. In a world that worships noise and constant stimulation, our nervous systems are often pushed into overdrive. We live in a state of low-grade fight or flight, constantly reacting to demands and pressures. When we choose to be alone, a powerful physiological shift occurs. Neuroscientists at the University of Rochester discovered that solitude actively engages the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest and digest system. When this system activates, your heart rate slows. Cortisol, the stress hormone levels drop, and the body begins to restore calm. The body, in stillness, learns to feel safe again. This is why solitude feels so restorative. It is a literal resetting of your biological baseline. Furthermore, when we step away from external tasks, we activate what neuroscientists call the default mode network (DMN) in the brain. This network lights up when we daydream, imagine, remember, and reflect on ourselves. It's not withdrawal, it's integration. The DMN is where the brain processes emotions, organizes memories, and essentially helps us rediscover who we are beneath the noise. Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who studied the psychology of flow, once said that only when a person is able to be alone comfortably can they truly engage in the highest forms of creativity and consciousness. A Yale University study found that regular solitude strengthens this network, enhancing emotional clarity and creativity. That's why moments of silence often bring profound insights. The brain isn't shutting down, it's reorganizing. This leads to the third key manifestation: enhanced meta-awareness. Meta-awareness is the ability to observe one's own thoughts and feelings rather than being consumed by them. It is the difference between being caught in a storm of anxiety and watching the storm from a safe distance. Solitude fosters this ability. Without constant external input, we are left with the contents of our own minds. People who enjoy being alone have learned to navigate this inner landscape with skill. A 2020 study from the University of Essex found that solitude strengthens reflection and emotional clarity, helping people understand their nuanced feelings and align their actions with their true values. They develop what psychologists call interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense one's inner state, knowing what you feel before it controls you. In this way, solitude becomes an act of profound integration, not a retreat from life, but a necessary return to oneself. Dr. Esther Buchholz, a psychologist who extensively studied solitude, once wrote, "Without solitude, we cannot construct our sense of self." For people who love being alone, stillness becomes a mirror where thoughts, emotions, and memories finally find order. It's not a wall between them and the world. It's the space where they prepare to meet the world more honestly, more calmly, and more completely. So, the psychology of people who like to be alone isn't about detachment. It's about balance, emotional independence, and inner clarity. They don't escape life. They pause to understand it. And in that quiet pause, they find something many overlook, a peace that doesn't need an audience. There was a time when I used to question why silence felt safer than conversation, why I could spend hours alone and still feel full, not lonely, just calm, centered. For a while, I internalized the societal message that something in me was broken. But to understand why people like us gravitate towards solitude, we must look deeper into the why. We must return to the roots, often found in our earliest experiences. My love for solitude didn't appear out of nowhere. It has deep psychological roots. And this is the core realization. Many of us who enjoy being alone didn't choose it initially because we inherently dislike people. We chose it, or rather, our nervous systems chose it because our minds and bodies learned early on that peace lives in quiet spaces, often as a contrast to external chaos. To understand this type of person, we must often return to their childhood. It is highly likely that they experienced environments where the external world felt overwhelming, unpredictable, or unsafe. Some of us grew up in homes where emotions were volatile. Perhaps there was chaos, loud conflict, or an atmosphere where love felt conditional and constantly had to be earned. Maybe the environment wasn't physically chaotic, but emotionally intrusive where boundaries were constantly crossed and there was no space to just be without interference. In places like that, silence becomes more than just a preference. It becomes a sanctuary. It becomes the only predictable, safe space. When the external world is characterized by intensity or intrusion, the developing mind learns to retreat inward for safety. This is not a conscious decision. It is an adaptive survival strategy. From a depth psychology perspective, this retreat is a defense mechanism. Psychologists identify this as a crucial form of self-regulation. It is the nervous system's way of finding calm after chronic overstimulation. When the world feels too loud, too demanding, too much, solitude becomes the body's way of saying, "Let me breathe, let me reset." This behavior, the retreat into solitude, is not who they truly are at their core. It began as a way to protect the self from being overwhelmed. It created a buffer zone, and the science supports this physiological need for retreat. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology found that intentional solitude helps regulate the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain responsible for processing fear and triggering the stress response, fight or flight. When we are constantly stimulated or grow up in threatening environments, the amygdala can become hyperreactive, making us jumpy, anxious, and emotionally volatile. Time alone allows that system to reset. It reduces emotional reactivity and improves mental clarity. That explains why those who value solitude often report that they think more clearly when they're by themselves. Why small problems stop feeling like overwhelming storms once the world grows quiet. The noise wasn't just external, it was internal, and solitude turns down the volume. Furthermore, growing up in emotionally intense environments often creates a secondary effect, heightened sensitivity or empathy. People who develop a need for solitude are often deeply attuned to the emotional states of others. They absorb the energy around them. They notice the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken tensions, the underlying anxieties of the people they interact with. This makes social interaction incredibly taxing. It's not just about having a conversation. It's about processing a vast amount of emotional data. Therefore, the need for solitude is also about restoration from empathetic exhaustion. When they spend time alone, their thoughts begin to settle, like dust finding its place after being stirred up. In that stillness, they can hear themselves again. They can distinguish between what emotions belong to them and what emotions they picked up from others. This connection to the self is vital. When we're constantly surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, and conversations, it's easy to lose track of what truly belongs to us. Our identity becomes merged with the demands of the world. Solitude becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting back who we are without interference, without performance, without the need to adapt to others. That's why, for many of us, being alone evolves from a reaction rooted in defense to a conscious choice rooted in self-respect. We choose solitude the way others choose conversation, not because we're avoiding connection, but because we value authentic connection so highly that we must be grounded in ourselves first. Solitude gives us the space to return to the world more grounded, more honest, more whole. It's not withdrawal, it's renewal. A 2017 study from the University of Buffalo confirmed this evolution. It found that people who are comfortable with solitude tend to show higher levels of emotional stability, autonomy, and creativity. They don't rely on constant interaction to feel complete or validated. Instead, they build an inner strength, an internal locus of control that sustains them. That insight reveals something crucial. Solitude isn't an escape from life. It's an act of self-trust. It's the internalization of safety. And maybe that's what's so often misunderstood. Choosing to be alone doesn't mean we've closed the door on others. It means we've learned, often through difficult experiences, that peace doesn't always come from the presence of people. Sometimes, it comes from a deliberate, restorative pause. Solitude isn't the absence of love or connection. It's the space where both begin, quietly, from within. The more we spend time alone, the clearer it becomes that solitude, when healthy, doesn't separate us. It connects us more deeply to ourselves, and paradoxically, often more deeply to the world. People who enjoy being alone aren't avoiding life, they're learning to understand it from the inside out. This foundation of self-understanding is powerful. Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison found that people who regularly embrace solitude show stronger activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation and complex reflection. In other words, solitude trains the mind to stay steady even when life feels uncertain. Solitude also deepens self-awareness. Without constant distraction, we begin to notice our emotional rhythms, what drains us, what restores us, what we truly value. Over time, that awareness builds authenticity. We stop performing and start understanding. We make choices that align with who we are, not who we think we should be. And interestingly, solitude can make us more empathetic, not less. A 2018 study in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin revealed that people who regularly practice solitude show higher empathic accuracy. They understand others' emotions more clearly because they've learned, in the quiet, to understand their own. When we sit quietly with our feelings, we learn to recognize that same humanity in others. So perhaps people who like to be alone aren't running from connection at all, they're preparing for it, grounding themselves so they can meet the world with gentleness instead of exhaustion. But we must also acknowledge that even the most profound healing practices have a shadow side. Sometimes we believe solitude can fix everything, that if we stay quiet long enough, the noise inside, the anxiety, the past trauma, the fear of connection will eventually fade away. We treat solitude as a cure-all, a safe harbor where nothing can touch us. But even healing has a shadow. The strategy that once saved you can eventually become the cage that confines you. Too much silence, when driven by fear rather than restoration, can turn into isolation. And there is a profound difference. What once felt like peace can slowly, subtly harden into distance, numbness, and stagnation. This is the cost of relying too heavily on solitude as a defense mechanism. Psychologists call this phenomenon pseudo-solitude occurs when being alone shifts from an active state of restoration to a passive state of avoidance. We tell ourselves we're protecting our peace, recharging our batteries, or simply enjoying our own company. But often, if we are brutally honest, we're not protecting our peace, we're protecting our pain. We are avoiding the vulnerability that comes with connection, the risk of being misunderstood, or the effort required to maintain relationships. The danger here is very real, both psychologically and physically. A 2021 study from the University of California, Berkeley, found that long-term, chronic isolation activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Our biology is wired for connection. We are social beings, even those of us who are deeply introverted or highly sensitive. When we withdraw for too long, the brain interprets this lack of connection as a threat to survival. This explains why the longer we withdraw into pseudo-solitude, the heavier life feels. It makes you feel perpetually exhausted. Mornings feel dull. Small joys fade. Motivation plummets. The defense mechanism has become maladaptive. It is no longer serving growth. It is hindering it. Solitude is meant to heal, but it can only do so when it remains connected to life. True solitude is active. It involves reflection, creativity, processing emotions. It restores balance and awareness. Isolation, on the other hand, numbs. It is characterized by distraction, dissociation, and avoidance. The renowned psychologist Dr. John Cacioppo, who studied loneliness, called this a self-reinforcing loop. The more we pull away out of fear, the more socially anxious we become. Our social skills atrophy. We start perceiving others as more critical or threatening than they actually are. And consequently, the harder it becomes to return to the world. Many of us have felt that chilling transition, how silence, once comforting and restorative, can slowly become a cage. The walls we built to protect ourselves become the walls that imprison us. We may become cynical or detached, viewing connection as inherently draining or superficial. This is the ultimate cost, a disconnection not just from others, but from the self. Because the self is not meant to exist in a vacuum. It is shaped and refined through both solitude and relationship. When we isolate, we stop growing. We become stuck in our own narratives, often negative ones rooted in past pain. The fear of being hurt again leads to the chronic pain of never truly living. The survival strategy that kept you safe in the past is now the very thing causing you harm in the present. Recognizing this shadow side is not a condemnation of solitude. It is an invitation to practice it more mindfully, more honestly. It is the beginning of the path toward healing and acceptance. The journey from using solitude as a shield to using it as a tool for growth requires specific steps. It requires awareness, compassion, and a willingness to reconnect. The first step on this healing path is awareness. It involves learning to distinguish between healthy, restorative solitude and fear-based isolation. This requires a practice of mindful solitude. It's the practice of checking in with your intention. When you choose to be alone, ask yourself the crucial question: am I recharging or am I hiding? Am I moving towards peace or am I running away from fear? Solitude isn't meant to protect us from the truth of our emotions. It is meant to prepare us to face them safely. If we are using solitude to numb ourselves, we are not truly practicing solitude. We are practicing avoidance. Healing begins when we allow the silence to amplify what we usually drown out. At first, this can be uncomfortable. The quiet brings up the doubts, the regrets, the anxieties, the things left unsaid. Yet, it's precisely in that discomfort that something honest begins to unfold. Psychology calls this process emotional regulation through self-reflection. According to a 2019 Harvard study, moments of intentional silence activate the insula, a part of the brain tied deeply to emotional awareness and empathy. Solitude, when practiced mindfully, sharpens our understanding of how we feel. It helps us hear our emotions not as chaotic noise, but as valuable signals guiding us toward balance. In solitude, emotions start to communicate. Anxiety becomes a call for rest. Sadness reminds us of what we value. Even anger reveals where boundaries have been crossed. This emotional clarity leads directly to the second step, self-compassion. In this stillness, we inevitably encounter our inner critic, the harsh voice that tells us we are not enough, that we are broken, that our need for solitude is a weakness. This voice is often an echo of past judgments or societal pressures. Healing requires us to meet this voice not with agreement or resistance, but with kindness. Research by Dr. Kristen Neff, a leading expert on self-compassion, shows that people who practice treating themselves with the same kindness they would offer a friend recover faster from stress and build deeper resilience. When we stop demanding perfection and stop judging ourselves for our needs, we begin to heal in quieter, more sustainable ways. Studies show that the same oxytocin system that soothes us in the presence of loved ones can also be activated through self-compassion. Even alone, we can feel connected and safe if we meet ourselves with kindness. Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist, once said, "When I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." That acceptance is exactly what mindful solitude teaches. It gives us permission to stop performing and simply be. The third step is reconnection. This might seem counterintuitive, but the path to healing isn't about choosing solitude over connection. It's about finding the balance where both can coexist harmoniously. Healing, after all, needs both quiet reflection and relational experience. Solitude teaches us who we are, but connection reminds us why it matters. Psychologist Dr. Esther Buchholz emphasized this. Without solitude, we cannot sustain our capacity for connection. Time alone doesn't make us love people less. It helps us love them more honestly, more cleanly. Because when we find peace within ourselves, we stop asking others to fill our emptiness. We stop depending on external validation. We can finally meet them with presence, not neediness. The goal isn't to build walls so high that no one can get in. It's to find doorways back to the world that feel calm, honest, and real. Ways to engage without losing ourselves in the process. The more we sit with solitude mindfully, the more we begin to see it isn't a retreat from life, but a profound return to it. This is what psychologists call existential integration, when our inner world finally aligns with the way we live. A 2020 study in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology found that reflective solitude strengthens both a sense of purpose and emotional balance. Life doesn't suddenly become easier, but it starts to make more sense. We stop fighting ourselves. Over time, solitude becomes less of a refuge and more of a teacher. It doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into understanding, into wisdom. Each quiet moment becomes proof that meaning isn't something to be found externally, but something we create by showing up fully, first for ourselves. As Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Perhaps that why, that deep sense of purpose and identity, is what solitude helps us rediscover, the part of ourselves that remains steady even when life isn't. So when the world feels heavy, maybe the answer isn't escape but remembrance. Solitude reminds us that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to the self that's been waiting patiently in the quiet all along. Maybe you've been called distant, quiet, or hard to read. Maybe you've been labeled as antisocial or lonely. I have, too. For a long time, it's easy to internalize those labels, to think something is fundamentally wrong with us, that maybe we weren't built for a world that never stops talking, never stops demanding. But the journey through the psychology of solitude has shown me, and hopefully you, otherwise, it taught me that being alone isn't about escaping life. It's about returning to it more grounded, more aware, more authentically yourself. We have explored how solitude is not loneliness, it is constructive aloneness, a state of profound awareness and self-regulation. We've seen how the brain uses this time to reset. Science explains this through the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system and the default mode network. Research confirms that solitude increases alpha brain waves patterns linked to calm, focus, creativity, and integration. That's why, after moments of quiet, your thoughts feel clearer and your heart steadier. Solitude, we've learned, is not absence, it's restoration. We traced the roots of this need, acknowledging that for many, solitude began as a survival strategy in overwhelming environments. It was a defense mechanism that provided safety when the world outside felt chaotic. But we also confronted the shadow, the danger, of pseudo-solitude, where the healing retreat turns into harmful isolation. The strategy that once saved you can become the thing that limits you. The path forward isn't about abandoning solitude, but about practicing it with awareness, self-compassion, and a balanced reconnection with the world. Over time, we must stop seeing silence as loneliness and start seeing it as strength. A profound, quiet strength. The philosopher Carl Jung once said, "In solitude, the mind gains strength and learns to lean upon itself." That's exactly what we find. Solitude doesn't make you distant. It makes you real. It strips away the performance, the expectations, the noise, and leaves you with the core of who you are. You are not broken because you need silence. You are not different in a negative way. You are simply someone who understands the language of stillness. In the end, solitude isn't about walking away from the world. It's about returning to it with a steadier heart, a clearer mind, and a deeper capacity for connection. In the quiet, we rediscover what truly matters: peace, clarity, and the courage to just be ourselves, without apology. So, if you've ever felt misunderstood for needing time alone, remember this affirmation: solitude isn't where you lose yourself, it's where you finally find yourself again. That's the quiet gift of solitude. It brings you home. So maybe the next time life gets too loud, give yourself permission to pause. Sit with the silence. Listen to what it's trying to tell you, because sometimes that's exactly where healing begins. Remember, you deserve peace, and you are truly not alone on this journey. If this message speaks to your soul, stay with us. Follow this channel for more reflections, more stories, and more reminders that even in silence, there is a voice worth hearing, your own.